But that leads us on to our focus topic for this month, which is on neurotechnology. Now, if this is a scary topic and you are concerned that you don't want devices like this reading your brain, we have included a link to the WikiHow on how you can make your own tinfoil hat at home. Please feel free to take a scan of that if that's something that you would like to have just in the bank as we go forward. But for the rest of you who are still interested in what neurotechnology can mean, especially for us here in finance and in fintech, we're going to be taking a look using the technology readiness scale. So if you're unfamiliar with this, we'll give you a really quick rebriefing on it. But this is something we use within Zenith to take a look at how ready a technology is for the prime time. So it was originally developed by NASA. It goes from TRL-1 up to TRL-9. And where we really get interested is when the technologies start to get towards TRL-6, where we see early prototypes. TRL-7, where we start to see those pilot schemes coming out. TRL-8, where we get the early adoption at scale. And finally, TRL-9, where it's mature, adopted, and fully supported. So when we go through this today, we'll be relating everything to this scale for you, just to put things in context. So going back, there's 5 real areas of neurotechnology that are out there at the moment. And these all have their own individual ratings. So we've put these ratings based on what we've been able to see in the marketplace. So for things like neurofeedback, which is what we're going to talk about in a little bit, this involves training individuals to self-regulate their brain activity by giving them data from reading a lot of activity as they're thinking, as they're doing tasks, or if they are trying to improve their concentration and sleep. It's widely used in research and clinical settings for conditions like ADHD, for treating anxiety, and also for looking at some of the impacts of epilepsy. There's a lot of substantial evidence focused on its efficacy. The technology and the protocols, however, are still being refined. So broad acceptance in the medical community is ongoing, and it's in the late prototype to early operational stages, which is why we've got some consumer-grade electronics that we're going to be using a little bit later on. With the brain-computer interfaces, that's the things that you're going to be seeing in the news. These are progressing rapidly. There's 2 types. There's non-invasive, which are being tested in controlled environments, and then there's the invasive ones. So this just means that they are physical implants. These are moving into early human trials. Hopefully, if this is a topic that's interested you, you might have heard of Elon Musk's Neuralink, which has successfully been deployed into a candidate who has locked-in syndrome. He's then been able to use that to control a computer. Arguably, then went on to play an 18-hour marathon session of Civilization 6, but that's his prerogative that he can now do that. While there's promising demonstrations of this technology, especially for aiding individuals with disabilities, the widespread clinical use and full integration into everyday application is still a few years away. So we'll hear this as an evolving story within news and media. For things like neuroprosthetics, you might be seeing people who've got like the robot hands that they can control and grip. These are fairly common. It's now just really an engineering thing to make it so that these are mass producible and reduce how much cost goes in there. With the transcranial magnetic stimulation, this is a device that comes on and activates part of your brain. This has been used for treating things like clinical depression and other neurological conditions. It's been widely used in clinical settings, has got a lot of regulatory approval in a number of countries. So this technology is fairly commercially available, with a lot of ongoing research aiming to both expand its applications and improve its efficiency. But we would consider this, basically fully operational mature. And then lastly, the one that you're probably most familiar with, magnetic resonance imaging functionally on the brain. This is where you have somebody going through a particular task and areas of the brain are lighting up. It's used both in clinical, but now even going into things like pop culture, where you might see this on, something like CSI or other police dramas. This has been widely used for brain imaging and research. It's a standard tool for studying brain function and diagnosing various neurological conditions. So we see this in routine use. So this is the most mature aspect of neurotechnology. In terms of why we should care about this in finance and fintech, we have identified sort of 3 main trends. So there is a great researcher called David Eagleman. You can go and watch a number of his TED Talks where he's been looking at being able to create new senses for humans. And this gives cognitive augmentation. So his team had started off looking at alternative treatments for people who were deaf and stumbled upon a way to use the unconscious contextualization of the human brain via haptic feedback. So like pulses and, like the rumble feature you might see in a controller. They're currently looking at the development of new senses, one of which has been related to how the brain can decipher patterns and trends in data. And so they've been looking at how they can essentially translate financial data into haptic feedback and then use the brain to predict what happens next. And it's a very interesting TED Talk if you've got 15 minutes to spare to go and watch some of David Eagleman's conversations. In terms of trader performance optimization, this will get a little bit more into our guest speakers' area of expertise. A lot of neurofeedback has been thought about how it can be used to train experts and artisans to achieve optimal mental states, reduce stress, improve focus and decision-making abilities. So currently the research is taking place to both examine and verify these claims, leading to interesting projects across multiple industries. And if you go check out this particular piece of research that we've put in, it's a very interesting white paper that sifts through a lot of the hype that's maybe been published over the last 10 years. And lastly, our close friends and partners over at Columbia University who've been working with us in AI, they are also running a cognition and decision lab. So this looks at being able to use tools and techniques from economics, neuroscience, and psychology to better understand the cognitive processes underlying economic decision-making. So they've got a couple of projects that are on, and you can go check that out if you type in the link underneath the image, and how things like limited attention is allocated during particular aspects of choice when making financial decisions, or understanding the role of incomplete preferences and bias in economic decision-making, and how that might help us both in things like being able to interact with consumers within finance, as well as starting to look at cognitive biases and where we might have decision-making within traders. So in order to put all of this, rather than just hype and jargon, we have invited our guest speaker, Barry Downing from the Weirbridge Group, who's a neurofeedback specialist, to join us. So Barry, would you like to introduce yourself to the group, please?
Hey, Keith. Were you going to do my intro, or do you want me to introduce myself?
If you would like to introduce yourself, I can always catch up if you've got anything missed out from the notes that we've got.
Why don't you go first, and we'll
okay. Right, I'll try and do the hype man thing. So unfortunately, I don't have my Flavor Flav giant clock around my neck. But Barry is experienced over the last 40 years in a number of different roles, starting off his career as an officer in the Royal Canadian Navy, where he was a company commander at the CF Leadership Academy. He's then went on to have a career as an executive leadership coach and a company turnaround specialist, which has led him into senior executive, including CEO roles in multiple companies going through turnarounds. He also became a founder and partner in a private equity firm, leading him into thinking about the investments and how this is going through. As part of his experience in the work that Barry was doing, he identified a gap that was really around how people were thinking and acting. So he's then went on to further develop his very impressive resume by becoming a PhD candidate in applied neuroscience, a certified neuroplastician, a founding fellow at the Institute of Organizational Neuroscience. He is also a qualified therapist, a certified clinical hypnotherapist, and a neurofeedback trainer, which now includes me as a case study client. I don't know what the right term would be here, but is there anything I've missed there, Barry, that you'd like to add in?
All good.
No, solid. Okay. So what we have been taking a look at, both Barry and I, has been what goes on in here. So Barry had introduced me to this, and at Mindlift, what we're going to show and talk over is just a recording of a session that we did earlier on today based on a program that Barry had written for me. So while we play that in the background, Barry, would you like to talk us through essentially what this is doing, how you're experimenting on me, and what your findings have been?
Yeah, before you press the play button, maybe I'll just go a little bit back into history.
Yeah, sorry.
Neurofeedback up until about less than 10 years ago was pretty expensive, had to primarily be done in clinic with very expensive equipment. In the last few years, there's been a number of companies coming to market with remote neurofeedback, much more affordable, things that can be done at home. So this is part of this revolution in terms of where things are. As Keith said earlier, it's still early adoption in terms of what's working, but unless we're trying to do clinical grade, looking for tumors and other things in the brain, most people don't need that level of sophistication. And this equipment actually does a very good job giving us meaningful data as we go forward. So with Keith has asked me, he said, look, I've got issues in sleeping and some other things. What do you think? I said, well, tell you what, let's do an assessment and see what your brain tells me. Apparently, his brain told me exactly what his wife is telling him, so we seem to be in alignment. So that's very good. Now you can hit the play button.
Yep. So this is just real time of me going through the application. So you can see I'm connected to Barry as my provider here, and Barry created this training program for me. So while I'm answering the questions on here, Barry, do you want to talk about how you've kind of focused on particular brainwaves and things?
Yeah, in the neuroscience 101, there's basically two categories of brainwaves. There's slow waves and fast waves. Slow waves are essentially for when you're trying to rest, digest, recover, repair things in your brain. And the fast waves are when you're trying to get things done, make decisions, do activities, and so on. In Keith's case, he was always in the high gear, not shutting off, and as a consequence, not a whole lot of rest, digest, recover, and repair, but certainly full speed going down the racetrack, which is fine. He's leading the race most of the time, but the issue is we don't want him to crash into the audience when he takes a corner, or we don't want him to burn out the engine. So this is exactly what I discovered, is that in Keith's case, he was missing some of the slow waves, particularly when his eyes are closed. So that's not good. That's what he should be resting. So I developed a protocol saying, okay, we need to increase some of the slow waves and try to decrease the fastest wave, which is a high beta. So in this protocol, it's really, he gets a reward. So you'll see it in the screen here. When he's doing what he's supposed to, when he's being a good boy, he gets an audio reward saying to the brain, yep, you're doing a good thing. So when it's
and that comes up in just a second. This is the calibration at the moment. So one thing I wanted to draw attention is that is a real-time view of these different brainwaves that Barry had looked to identify within the training program. This is the point where we get to the, you know, the Pavlov's dog style thing. So it asked me to choose a particular thing. And really what I'm choosing here is what audio I want to hear. So my one is I like the burning logs. So essentially, when I'm in the zone that Barry wants me to be in, I will hear the sound of a crackling, roaring fire. And as I deviate from that, instead I hear stormy gales and stormy winds. You know, so just to add that in, and we've sped up the footage here because it's a 20-minute session. But Barry, you want to talk us through possibly the volatility of my brain activity at the bottom there?
Well, he knew he was recording, so that's obviously another factor as well. But in general, Keith's doing extremely well when he's in the training. So you'll see the circles at the bottom are really just showing you all the different waves. When the bullseye is complete in the center, it means all the waves are doing what it's supposed to be doing. Now, again, this is only feedback from Keith's brain sending waves. I'm not doing anything. The app is not doing any. There's no insertion. It's only feedback saying you're in the right zone or you're not in the right zone. And the brain, you know, as you said, Pavlov's dog loves the positive feedback that basically comes within a millisecond of the brain waves doing their thing. So there's a lot of fire here, which is good because that's exactly what we're looking for. You'll see some notifications up top. Keith starts shuffling and moving, so it says, "Hey, you're moving. Stop moving." Not really helpful in this particular case because his eyes are closed, but I get to see that. Keith, try to stay still next time.
I'm just too much of a fidget. You know, I would say that when we did do the recording on this, I was in my office chair, which is, you know, I'm used to sort of hunched forward and working in there. So usually what we try to do for this is have me in a more reclined position, so I'm much more relaxed. I don't really need to fidget or move. My feet are in a much more stable position. So I do move a little bit more. And also this was like in the morning. Usually what Barry has designed this for is to help me to unwind at the end of the day to prepare me for sleep. So doing this at lunchtime, you know, I was close to, you know, slipping into a coma and going for a nap, you know. Thankfully I didn't have the itis as I was doing this from a large meal. But it's the interesting thing is as we're doing this, it becomes easier over time. So with the first few sessions, we'll show you some of the results of some of my earlier sessions. We've completed 4 sessions to date. I am now finding that to get into the zone, I'm doing that faster. I'm doing that, you know, within maybe like 2 or 3 minutes of the session, rather than the first one, my brain activity was all over the place. But I'm also noticing some changes in terms of the timings. There's another piece of feedback that Barry's given me that maybe having a little bit more of a structured time where I'm going to go to sleep and time where I'm going to stop working would be helpful. But I do tend to, I'm much more of a sort of nighttime person, so I'm doing a lot of my activities in the evening. So in here, I'm getting feedback. I've got EXP that's tied in this, so it's building up, and then I get these results. So I'll just pause here. Barry, you want to sort of contextualize these results for us in terms of what a normal human being would have versus what maybe I've got?
Actually, you're in this result, you're looking really good. So that's a positive thing. Typically, what I'm looking for, the deep zone up top of the blue, where you see the top of the graph, is when all the waves are in the right zone all at the same time. And it stays for a consistent period of time. So the goal that we're looking for is to at least stay in the zone of all waves at periods of at least 10 seconds per episode. So Keith is actually at that point. When we started, he was much lower, which means basically he could get there but couldn't stay there. So that's obviously an issue that if you're trying to rest or repair, if you're not staying in that zone very long, your brain's not doing its thing. And the neutral or down at the bottom is when either at least two of the, in this case, there's 4 waves, at least 2 of the waves are not cooperating and not doing what needs to be done. And sometimes that's muscle memory, or you're twitching and you're interfering with the signal. So it's a combination of signal not being clear or the waves not being where we want them. But if you look at this, Keith is like, he's had streaks of 36 seconds where he was staying in the zone a long period, which is fantastic. And his overall in the zone is like 74%, and that's obviously pretty good as well. So no, as a client, Keith is doing extremely well as he's performing this. What I had said to him when we first, I said, let's start with the sleep, because generally, if people are having sleep issues, if you address the sleep, you're typically addressing a lot of the other things that are happening during the day as well. So sleep is always the first place to start. If people can sleep well, typically that's making a big difference in their cognitive abilities during the day as well. So in Keith's case, we want to start with sleep, and then we'll move to some other things if he so desires, probably about a month or 2 from now.
Yep. So this is showcasing now how the sessions have changed. So one thing I kind of want to draw, we did a lot of our sessions towards the end of June, the start of July. This one here, even though it says it was on the same day, one was before I went to sleep, just after midnight going into the second, and then one was I went to sleep before midnight the same day. So it's the difference between, maybe staying up later to do it and then actually going to sleep at what would be considered a more normal time. So over here we can sort of see the trend that Barry had noted, going into my second session, which was way worse than my first, but I think that was really just through exhaustion at that time, getting a lot of things done. We're getting the feedback, we're getting, the average streak time, which as Barry said, we only have over 10, and then starting to see, how much EXP. So it's really sort of hitting that gamification aspect as we're starting to look at the training as it builds up over time. So I don't think there's any weird anomalies in here. I think we get to the end of session 1, and that's the end of the video there. But what we have included, just so that you can see kind of what we were starting off with and what we're working with, is things like the brain maps. So Barry, would you mind taking us through this as well?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, these slow waves, you ideally want them to be lower when your eyes are open, i.e. you shouldn't be sleeping then. And you want your fast waves higher. Then you want that to reverse. When your eyes close, you want an increase in slow waves and a decrease in the fast waves. In Keith's case, if you look at the alpha is considered to be sort of a mindfulness state where you're, I describe it as the car is turned on, but it's in neutral, so it's not really moving, which is fine. So in Keith's case, it actually went down when his eyes were closed, which is not what we want. We don't want him to be, and he doesn't show the full scale, which is fine, but his faster waves would actually be rising when he was sleeping. So yeah, his claim was, I get really creative at night. I said, great, but you're not sleeping, so that's not good. In the longer, you can be very creative for a short period of time, but we don't want the engine to fry. So in the protocol that I designed was saying, okay, when your eyes are closed, we need to increase the delta waves, increase the theta waves, which are actually not bad. So he was able, the theta is when you're trying to fall asleep or you're trying to be really creative. So you see when, in Keith's case, he's got his theta waves are going up and he closes his eyes, so he gets really creative. he doesn't have the delta here, but the delta was actually not in the space that we want. So although he could be, in that dreamy, creative state, he wasn't actually getting good sleep. So that's exactly why we decided on the protocol, saying we need to be able to turn that off at nighttime when you actually need to sleep, to have a good period of sleep as we're going forward. But the progress that he's making is quite good. So I'm not concerned with this progress.
And in terms of how this impacts other people, so obviously we're focused on a very unique case for me, which is about improving rest for that, with a view that once we've got that as a foundation, we can start to look at some of the more interesting things. For others, especially when we start to think about people involved in very stressful jobs or in very critical and important jobs, we start to look at these types of things. So their concentration levels, which would impact onto things like ADHD, their perceived stress. So how much are they seeing that they're suffering from negative impacts from stress on their mental cognitive abilities? The anxiety scale, if people are panicking about things, which, clearly I don't get that much. But then also things like insomnia, where you might have, as Barry's saying, all the power back there, but the torque's gone. The wheels are spinning, but you're not really getting anywhere because you're fatigued and going through it. So Barry, since this is your area of expertise, in terms of maybe not on my particular stats, but in terms of how this might be more beneficial to either members of the audience or people that they might be supporting, or clients they may be trying to work with, would you be able to share any insights in terms of these sort of aspects and why we would want to focus on them?
Sure. And these are just samples of standard psychological surveys or health surveys that are out there. So I'm not creating these. These are right out of from the medical profession. This is we select these based on the interview that the practitioner would have with the client, saying, "Okay, what are your symptoms? What are you feeling?" So during that, if Keith says, I might have ADHD, well, guess what? I'm plopping in the survey, which is self-assessed by him, saying, here are my symptoms that match or don't match with what's up there. So there's a pretty big battery of surveys that we can apply, but typically it's based on whatever the client is saying, like I'm having sleep issues, or I'm having anxiety, or hey, I had a brain injury. Okay, that might impact how we're reading your brainwave, so it's good to know. I'm not a medical practitioner. I can't treat diseases, but it's good to know that if I'm seeing weird things happening in the brain, that there may be, a tumor or some other cause that has happened to be behind that. I have a range of clients. I have, for example, private bankers, CEOs. A lot of them either are coming from traditionally there's a lot of anxiety and stress deprivation and things that are there. But there's also on the high performance side, which is really cool, where people are saying, you know what, I'm doing extremely well right now, but I want to be really, really creative. How do I ramp up the creativity? So what we're really looking for is sometimes the patterns in the brain would say, yep, I would expect you to be really high in executive function, but sometimes you're overusing that executive function. That's all you're using. You're not using the rest of your brain. So sometimes it's good to actually try to upregulate some of the other systems that you have that you can able to use. So it's really interesting. And my clients range from kids with ADHD to adults who are going. I've had a lot of people with massive trauma in their past. I've had people who have been tortured, who've gone through some pretty nasty things in their lives. On the other side, I've got professional athletes who just want to get the edge on where they go next. So the tools are great in terms of you can really tailor it to what people are looking for. And the technology is getting to be very user-friendly, which is really nice.
Well, Andrew, unfortunately, you're just about to drop as we go into that part of the conversation. So I'll make sure that you can... We'll see about taking this as a recording, this particular part, and then putting that up. But based as what Barry's saying, we're looking into, what sort of ways that we would try and tie this into open source within finance. So some of the conversations that we've been having internally between Barry, Patrick, myself, as we've been spitballing this between us, is starting to look at ways that we can bring neurofeedback into some of the tech stacks that we're working with. So, I mean, the obvious one that we've got is in the diversity inclusion aspect for accessibility. So thinking about new ways to interface, which might be more onto the brain-computer interface, But then also, just as Barry's describing there, being able to start to analyze where people are and where people want to be, and using that to augment to give them real-time assistance, like, you're using too much of your, as Barry said, executive function. Maybe try using these tools to approach this problem, and being able to have that, like, if we can consider something like a co-pilot for coding, could there be a co-pilot for, how you're actively thinking, how you're coping with your stress levels? And Barry, I'd love to get your thoughts. I know this is more aspirational things that we're now thinking about in terms of how the technology can be, but from your perspective in terms of, the applied research and where the industry as a whole, is this something that could be realistically feasible?
It's actually early stages of happening. I was actually on a call with a new startup in Europe yesterday, where they're asking me to actually help guide them through this process. And they are full on with how do we incorporate AI to help make this more accessible to a lot of people quicker. So it's definitely already there. There have been a number of studies, like just taking the data from, for example, you could take your data, and I think you have in some cases, and plug it back into AI and say, hey, tell me what you're seeing here. AI is actually doing a pretty good job with interpreting what the things are. Being able to tweak the protocols to be able to give very tailored, it's not there yet, but it will be. So it's early stages of where it's at. So yeah, this is not a crazy idea. It's we're on the cusp of it right now.
So one of the things that we'd love to maybe consider is taking, like, the software development kits for pieces of hardware like this, and start to think around some of the ideation of how we could, potentially plug this in. So here in Phenos, we obviously have things like Trader Desktop and FTC3, which is all about interoperability between different trading platforms with the various partners that are using that. Starting to think about this as a cognitive plugin that could go in there that can augment as somebody's trading, here is a perspective on how you are thinking, how you are behaving. Are you starting to see a decline? What action could you take? I mean, there's potentials around there for us to start thinking about what sort of libraries we could develop as a community. And then by sharing our insights from financial services on very particular things that we're looking for in there, maybe those could be shared into more of a biomedical research open source community as well, reciprocally, so that we can start to augment the conversation and development around there. Do you feel that that would be something that would be attractive towards people within clinical professions?
Very, very much so. Right now, one of the barriers is the software owners that are charging a fortune to take the signals from the various devices, which typically they don't own. They're somebody else's devices, and I think there's a huge opportunity to go more open source, because honestly, the data is what is becoming more and more important, not necessarily the clinical intervention from an individual perspective. Being able to see the longer term trends and how you can actually set policies and procedures to actually influence the society or an organization at a much broader level it's knocking on the door. It's right there now.
Yeah. And that leads us into, like, the next thing that we talked about was around security and authentication. So obviously we'd spitballed about, your ability to visualize an image, or your ability to visualize an idea or have a memory. And could those, particular patterns be recorded? Could they then be used as a way of fingerprinting for authentication? But then in the conversation you and I had been having offline, Barry, we talked about, like, the evolution of how your brain goes through as you go in different parts of your life. So unfortunately, having your 16-string password that you wrote, 12 years ago that nobody's hacked, because it takes another couple of, million years to do it, it's not going to be as permanent as maybe the brain activity of imagine a dinosaur when you were 6 years old to imagine a dinosaur when you're 56 years old. So obviously we started to think about this, but is this something that, there's research going into? I know that we talked about things like aphantasia and how some people are colorblind in their imagination, but some people also, like, totally augment it with, like, superior lighting and, like, set dressing for their imagination. So is this something, again, that could essentially eventually become some sort of open source plugin for authentication if people are using these devices?
Yeah, it's certainly not my area of expertise, but I do know there is a lot of work in this space for sure. And I think a lot of it comes down to, it's not as simple as taking a fingerprint. It would have to be taking somebody through a sort of a set pattern that they would be going through in their minds to make sure it's replicable to a great deal. So even though there are changes, there are some consistent patterns that would happen brain to brain, although they do change over time. So the short answer is I don't think it's there right yet. Now, there might be Department of Defense and other folks that might know differently than I do, which is totally possible. But I think clearly it is a possibility in the future at some stage once you get all the tweaks of what is noise, what's not noise, and because one of the issues is going to be as well if Keith keeps being agitated when he's trying to do this, then his signal quality is not going to be great, and then his password won't work because he's just not sitting still. So obviously, this is an issue that would have to be overcome as well.
Yep. Sitting still, and eventually they're just going to hot glue me a chair. That's the only solution. And then lastly, the parts that we started to talk about, which was much more into the executive levels that you were talking about, specifically in terms of like trading and investment. And I know we've got a lot of front office partners that are now part of Phenos and start to think about, where they would be interested in terms of things like cognitive load and focus levels. But you brought up some great conversation points earlier on when we were talking around things like cognitive bias and behavioral insights. I mean, how would we essentially look to try and first of all, identify these and then start to build them into some part of a tech stack that we could leverage? And where do you see these being the most useful when people are actively working?
No, absolutely. When you think of a trader, and particularly if you're thinking of a very good trader, he has a particular algorithm in his brain of how he's processing things. Now, that may be good the majority of the time, but it might lead to being biased in certain scenarios, always leading to the same algorithms or the same patterns. That can be quite dangerous if you come with if he has a client or somebody who has quite a different expectation from where he's at. He's cognitively, he's still going to want to go down what he's normally been doing because that's been successful. And his brain, you talk about neuroeconomics. The brain it takes a lot of the energy level from operating the body every day. So it's going to take what it knows works as a priority. So coming up with something new, it takes a deliberate effort. Sometimes, if you're looking at your top performers, they don't want to change. They're saying, look, I'm the best there. Why would I change? So sometimes you need to be able to give them the data saying, look, here's what's happening. Here's what your brain is doing as you're going through some of these. You're opening yourself up to. So if you give the evidence base saying there are other things you can be looking at, I think that's at least opens up the possibility that maybe I am going down the same. I don't want to use the same algorithm in my brain the entire time until it's defunct. Maybe I should learn early enough that maybe I have to adapt it and change it.
So maybe this is something that we could potentially develop some open source standards in terms of the reading, but then this maybe moves into more of an inner source type project where you take the tool and you apply it to your data of your traders. Obviously, there's a secret sauce element within that, but being able to then take that, contextualize and understand it, maybe there's different offshoots of looking towards how you can best support the traders that are doing it, but then also look at the classifications of what were the set of circumstances, how did they do it, and then being able to use that data to go over towards more of your quants and strats who are looking at more things like algorithmic trading. So, I mean, I in my mind, just sparking off in the conversation that we've had, that would be the kind of route that I would want to go down in exploration.
The technology is certainly there. You'd have to overcome all the ethical and the personal the personal issues, but the technology is there to be able to do a lot of that quite well.
Yep. Well, thanks so much, Barry. What we're going to do now is we're going to open the floor. So for anyone who's on the call that's got any questions, thoughts, concerns, we'd like to ask Barry anything specifically around neurofeedback and neurotechnology, please feel free to use this opportunity to either unmute, or if you can't unmute, please go to the reactions button, hit the raise hand button, and myself or one of the other Zenith coordinators will get you unmuted. Here we go. Aman?
Hi. Thanks, Barry. I found that really interesting. One thing I was curious about is how susceptible is the technology to interference from external electromagnetic waves? So if you're standing near a mobile tower or something like that, could that interfere with the signals? And furthermore, are there opportunities for electromagnetic hacking of the signals?
Great question. The first part, the signal from the scalp is like very, very low frequency, and you're talking about centimeters. So unless you're basically standing on the tower, you're not likely to have interference of any significance. Now, different people react differently, of course, and in some cases, if you're in your wall-to-wall wiring around you, yes, there may be some interference, but typically the tech is pretty good to not have that issue. When you're getting into things like the magnetic stimulation, others, you're more susceptible. But this case, we're only reading what's coming out of the brain, not anything that's coming back into the brain. So all those external devices wouldn't necessarily come in and affect your brain. If it did, it would have affected whether you were wearing tech or not. It doesn't. It won't make a difference. So it should. The measurement will reflect what's really going on. So that's not a big issue. In terms of if you want to hack the system, again, right now most of this is local. Like you have a Bluetooth connection primarily for most of these. Some are you can have hard wires. I have a bunch of different devices for that. Some people are very, very sensitive to any magnetic fields or electromagnetic fields. But right now, we haven't found, for the most part, any significant disruption from magnetic fields. I've had some clients who are deathly afraid of anything tech. So, well, obviously, that's not going to work if you don't even have a cell phone. We don't have a device to use to go there. But I haven't found it. Doesn't mean it's not possible. But certainly from reading the brainwaves, that wouldn't be a problem. Being able to hack the signal afterwards, that's I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, I would say on that one, from our perspective, it would have the same vulnerability as any Bluetooth peripheral. So because there's a data transmission channel that's coming across there wirelessly, it would be the same attack vectors that you would go in if you were looking to, say somebody's got like earpods or something and you want to listen into their conversation. It's going to be the same protocols that you're going to be looking to protect against on that as well. So very much in terms of it being a peripheral, that's where I would say that the message, like trying to grab the message, like if you're doing like an Adam and Eve type thing, within there, that's where the considerations are going to have to be. But it's again, it's a read signal, maybe I'm saying this, Barry's hypnotized me or something, but I've never had any like weird thoughts come into my head when I've been doing this. Everything's been fairly standard. The only thing has been concentrating on making a fire bigger. I haven't suddenly became an arsonist that I'm aware of. So I'm fairly confident that it's purely just a data transmission signal that we would think of as a telecommunications encryption vulnerability.
And then one small follow-up is, how long has testing been going on for? Like, to say like there are no issues.
Testing of what specifically? Sorry.
The technology, let's say, which Keith uses, how long has it been tested for on like people and that kind of thing?
Sure. It's MindLift in particular, the one that Keith is using, has been around for about 10 years. So this is not what is new is the technology, like the EEG signaling has been around since the 70s. So that's what is different is just being the ability to do it on a remote level with like a Bluetooth device. That's been maybe 10 years or so, but the technology itself has been around for 50 years plus.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions to the audience?